Welcome again to the League of Women Voters of Laramie County sponsored forum for the council members for the town of Timnath. The town of Timnath is streaming tonight's forum live on Facebook, and viewers can post questions. A video will be available of the forum on the website tomorrow. And we thank the town of Timnath for making this forum possible. Ballots for this election will be mailed to voters on March 16th. Ballots can be mailed back or dropped off at the Timnath Town Center. They must be received in the clerk's office by April 7th at 7 p.m. As you came in, you were invited to write questions for the candidates. Please hand those to the ushers. We will collect them and screen them for duplication. Thank you. We strongly urge the audience to be courteous and refrain from applauding or demonstrating support or non-support for candidates. The candidates will have 90 seconds to introduce themselves. They will have 1 minute to answer each question put to them and 1 minute to present a closing statement. Our timers will warn the candidates when they have 15 seconds remaining and then indicate when their time is up. Unfortunately, Mr. Rob Collette is not able to be with us this evening, so we will have the other three candidates for town council at our forum tonight. We will begin by asking the candidates to state why they are running for office and what skills and experience they bring to the position, and they will each have 90 seconds to respond. We will begin with Brett Hansen.
My name's Brett Hansen. I live in Timnath Ranch. Been there about 6 years. Lived there with my wife, Rebecca, and our two kids, a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old. As far as my background goes, I have a bachelor's and a PhD in electrical engineering. As part of my educational experience, I published over a dozen articles in peer-reviewed academic journals, and I led on a project that involved management of an undergrad research team, collaboration between multiple college departments, and a partnership with a private company. Since moving to Northern Colorado, I work in computer chip design, and I have management responsibilities on projects that take multiple years. These are multi-million-dollar projects and involve collaboration efforts with teams from around the world and from different companies. And that's some of the experience and mindset I hope to bring to the council. I've been attending council meetings for nearly a year now. Council meetings, planning commission meetings, workshops, any kind of meeting I could find. And over that time, I've seen ways that I thought we could improve. And I'd like to add some extra energy, some fresh energy, and some fresh insight into how the town is growing and the town is developing. I think we can all feel that there's issues that are important to us. We're all a little bit concerned about how the town is growing and developing, and I think the town would benefit from some fresh questions and some fresh perspective and analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. We will next go to Mrs. Lisa Lake.
Hi, my name's Lisa Lake, and I'm running for council, and I'm actually a current council member. I've been serving on the council for the last 2 years. I was appointed to a vacant seat 2 years ago. And in my time on council, I'm the Timnath representative for the North Front Range Metropolitan Planning Organization that works on transportation and air quality issues. I also have experience in the past serving on my former homeowners association, 1 year as secretary and the second year as president. I have lived in Timnath now for almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years at the end of this month. I have two kids, one at Bethke and one at Kennard. And I'm running for council for 3 different reasons. And the first is to create a sense of community for all community members. And I realize that means different things to different people. So some of the ideas that I've had is to promote local businesses and encourage local businesses, to continue or expand on family and community events, to have a focus on public safety so that all community members feel safe, The second one is to ensure responsible growth related to infrastructure, homes, and businesses. And the third is to increase civic engagement and find additional ways to get community members involved.
Thank you, Mrs. Lake. Next, we will have Brian Veronin.
Thank you. I'm Brian Veronin, and I'm running for Town Council. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you to the League for hosting this event. We appreciate that. My family and I moved to Timnath almost 12 years ago. We absolutely love it here. I got involved with Timnath government quite a number of years ago. In 2009, I was appointed to Planning Commission, and then in 2010, I was elected to Town Council. At that time, I was appointed by my peers as Mayor Pro Tem, which was a position that I held for the 8 years that I served on council. My work background is in efficiency and project management. I have my education, I have an engineering degree as well as an MBA, so I think that I'm well suited to help the town manage its complex projects and the complex financial models that go along with it. The reason why I'm running is because I want to help Timnath keep growing responsibly, and I think I have the background and the experience to help us do that. It's important that we not just plan for today and tomorrow, but we need to be looking 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first question will begin with Mrs. Lake. Are there any specific things you would like to accomplish during your term on council?
I think there's a lot I would like to accomplish. Some of that for me is focusing on those 3 areas that I mentioned, particularly the civic engagement piece. I've worked for municipal, county, and state government, and I feel that a lot of times the community members don't always feel that they have a voice or that their voice is not heard. And so one of the things that I would really like to do that I've requested in the past and would like to continue to push is to have our town meetings recorded or available by video so that people can watch those meetings. And also present more educational opportunities for community members related to budget, related to planning, getting them involved in different commissions. And then also having listening sessions that all council members or mayor as well can have listening sessions that are a little bit less formal to hear community members' input.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin.
There's so many things. The Poudre Trail, parks and sidewalks through our community events. My message that I've been trying to share with the community is a complete Timnath. And what that means is that we would have access to entertainment, employment, recreation, and amenities all close to home. So what I would like to do is to see us work in our community to create zoning and regulation that would help encourage all of those things to come into our town. I want us to be able to have a complete community. I want our kids to be able to play soccer games here and baseball games here. I want us to be able to have a nice dinner. So I want to be able to attract businesses and build a recreational program. I'd like for us to be able to get on our bikes and ride the Poudre Trail into Fort Collins or into Windsor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen.
A lot of things I want to look at deal with how effective the government delivers its town services. For example, in the financial statements for last year in snow plowing, there was $25,000 budgeted for snow plowing. We only spent $13,000. And a lot of residents have expressed concern about how effective that service is. The money's already been budgeted, and I think the town should really try to up its game there. We should try and do better. And we should look for ways we can be efficient with where we're spending. There are a number of services that we use that we could try to be more efficient with how we're spending our money. For example, some of the contracted services we use, they consume quite a bit of money, some of them $800,000-$900,000, and we should constantly be evaluating these relationships and making sure that we're efficient with how we spend your money. When I first moved here as well, looking at another issue there is there was a lot of excitement expressed about how the town was growing and being built out. And I don't hear quite that same level of excitement anymore. I think people are feeling a little bit of a strain on how the town is growing. And I'd like us to also improve in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. We'll begin the next question with Mr. Veronin. And I've been asked by the audience that we all, including me, use our mics a little better. Mr. Veronin, what are Timnath's chief infrastructure needs and how will those needs be met?
Is this better? Okay. So I think it's obvious to everyone, the biggest problem that we have in town right now is Harmony Road. As you move from east to west and occasionally from west to east, there's a bottleneck getting in and out of the Walmart parking lot that's going to be addressed quite soon. There's also a big issue with getting traffic over the top of I-25. A lot of that problem lies with CDOT themselves. They have little interest in what goes on above the interstate. Their primary goal is to get vehicles on and off of the interstate. But the town, I hope to help the town work closely with CDOT to improve that scenario, possibly with some additional left-hand turn lanes going eastbound so that we can get traffic moving quicker through there. I think in the future as well, we're going to see some issues at Prospect as the high school develops up there and as properties begin to develop more significantly in that area. I think that...
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Veronin. Now, Mr. Hansen.
I think it's been discussed a few times tonight, the traffic. The traffic on Harmony Road is a major infrastructure issue. And I think a lot of these issues happen because we needed to be asking more questions as development was happening. You look at the Walmart parking lot, and as these other high traffic businesses were entering that lot, I've talked to several residents who were very surprised that there were no improvements made to that entrance and exit of that Walmart parking lot before those businesses came in. I look at Timnath Ranch and our lack of access that doesn't involve having to get on Harmony Road. And I think that's another area that we could do a lot better with the way we're framing all of our development around Harmony Road. We have to constantly be analyzing the impact on traffic that that's going to be having and looking for ways to mitigate those impacts.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake.
Well, I think everyone's mentioned Harmony Road is definitely one, but I also agree that some of the other streets that could be utilized as more main streets, such as the Prospect Road, at some point Mulberry as well. I know if you're trying to turn onto Mulberry from County Road 5, that's pretty difficult as well. But then also, I think part of the infrastructure that's related to traffic is also completing some of the trails. That might alleviate some of that traffic if you could take your bike and get over to Walmart easily or get into the Old Town area. So I think looking at some of those other infrastructure needs that aren't related to vehicles would be important to look at as well.
Thank you. We'll begin now with Mr. Hansen. What standards, if any, do you think should regulate metro districts?
First thing I'd like the town to do is really take responsibility for this metro district monster that's out there. The town likes to brag about the property tax rate that it places on residents, but the way that the town relies on metro districts actually places a significant tax burden on the residents that live in those metro districts, and I think that needs to be acknowledged and considered when the town makes decisions. And I think what the town needs to do is take responsibility for empowering residents that want to serve on metro district boards. There's been talk about educational outreach. I think that educational outreach would be better if it was focused on residents who wanted to serve on those metro district boards through articles, short videos, any kind of educational materials of that nature. And I think a lot of the issues and difficulties around metro districts will start to get better as we see more and more residents interested and empowered to serve on those metro district boards.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake.
I also agree about having more community members involved in metro districts in some ways, whether it's serving on the board or being informed of where it is that they live, and I think we have a role to play in that. I also think that the town has a role to play in as far as the service agreements and service plans that are available to those, in trying to make sure that those community members have an end in sight to the mill levies, have an end in sight to the debt that's there, and having it run in a way that is fair and not conflicts of interest. I do think they serve a purpose to get some of that infrastructure in, but it needs to be regulated well and overseen.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin.
So I think probably the biggest issue that a lot of folks have with metro districts is a lack of communication and a lack of understanding. And if you haven't lived in a metro district in the past, then if it's new to you and you're in a brand new home that hasn't been assessed by the county, it can be quite shocking 12 months when your property gets fully assessed. What I'd like to see happen is, and I liken it to a truth in lending statement. So it's clear up front what your mill levy is, what the term of the debt is for your metro district, and what the caps are. So you understand that these rates can be raised. I think there needs to be better communication around how you can serve on the board. I know that the metro districts, they provide information about their meetings, and all they have to do is post a 8.5 by 11 page. Just because that's statutory doesn't mean that it's enough. I think that increased communication can really help with the metro districts.
Thank you. We will begin with Mrs. Lake. What would your plan be to assure that open space is maintained throughout the town?
I think one thing I would do is to ensure that different neighborhoods have a requirement that they have certain open space, that they are required to have, to make sure that they all have the parks areas, that they have green belts inside their plans. And I think right now a lot of the neighborhoods do a really good job of having that open space. But I think the trail is another way that we can increase that. Is when you have that trail finished off, there'll naturally be some open space related to that as well. And then I think because people have identified parks and trails and recreation as a priority, that we dedicate a little bit more funding to that area so that we can ensure that that happens.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin.
So I think it's important that we manage open space not just outside of communities and in between communities, but actually inside them as well. So if you live in a home here in Timnath that doesn't back to another resident that has open space behind you, it's likely it's because of some legislation that I helped pass when I served on council before. A little bit more space helps make for better neighborhoods and better neighbors when you don't have to hear and smell what your neighbors are cooking on the grill. There's lots of things that we can do to encourage those when development comes into town, and Timnath actually has specific requirements, percentages that that developers have to provide based on the size and density of the neighborhood that they're bringing into town. I think that the inclusion of trails and sidewalks will actually help this as well, and because we always seem to do a good job along those trail lines to protect the perimeters from the, sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen.
Yeah, I like the idea of placing open space parameters on how our developments are shaping, making sure that we have so much open space per acre or per household or whatever. And I also believe that beyond just small pockets of open space, we need to also include larger areas of open space. I think Timnath should grow in a way that preserves a balanced and small town feel, and open space is part of that. I think that also in addition to the neighborhoods, the trails. I think the trail system should have some significant open space. I was just talking with an individual today who talked about how he could go in his backyard onto a trail and have some nice open space to run around with his dog, and he just loved that aspect of living here. And I think as much as possible, we need to try to preserve open sanctuaries for people to be able to enjoy being outside and not feel like they're just surrounded and in an overcrowded city.
Thank you. Our next question will begin with Mr. Veronin. As part of a community master plan, how would you address affordable housing?
So affordable housing is a very common question in northern Colorado. It's something that that's an issue for all communities here. I think in Timnath, how we can address that is through different product. I think that we need to be a little more creative in some areas of town with higher density product, whether that be multifamily or patio homes, condos, townhouses, homes that maybe share a property line so that they can take up a little less space and that there's a little less expense involved in bringing those homes up out of the ground.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hansen.
I also support the idea of some varied housing product, some townhomes and multifamily, but I think it definitely needs to be done with care, with reason. It becomes an emotional subject, particularly in Timnath Ranch, whenever people start talking about multifamily appearing in our neighborhood. And I think if we got too aggressive with putting a lot of multifamily units in the town, you would change the character of what Timnath is. I think some smaller multifamily units, some smaller developments with townhomes, I think it makes sense. And I want our community to be a place that where people can live, that it isn't just multi-million-dollar mansions that most people can't afford to live in. I don't think that would present the feeling of Timnath that we want to live in, that nice small town vibe, that family-friendly atmosphere. And so I would support the options there that would allow people to live here.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake.
I agree with all of those comments as far as we definitely need to have variation of different housing options, whether that's related to actually having single family versus condos versus duplex, things like that. But then also a variation in lot sizes, because I think a lot of times that lot size definitely has an impact on the value of the home. So I think we need to look at that as well. And then one thing that I'm not sure if we've looked at before is looking at what options are available from the federal government. A lot of times they do offer certain things if you have different housing prices within your community. And I think it would be important to investigate what those options are and see if that's something that's viable for Timnath and if that's something that Timnath would want to do.
Thank you. We'll begin with Mr. Hansen. Please comment on any plans you may have to maintain the safety of town citizens.
Well, I support Timnath going to a 24/7 police coverage, its own homegrown office. The price tag that's been placed for the county sheriff to continue to support Timnath came out about $2 million a year. I know last year we spent about $1.8 million on public safety. We have more officers coming on and more equipment, and so next year we budgeted about $2.8 million. So it will cost a little bit more to have our own homegrown force, but I think having a Timnath police force that we control, that is not answerable to a distant jurisdiction that has to answer to lots of communities, I think is in the best interest of Timnath. I think that we need a police station that's done for the right value and the right price and helps meet the needs of our police force to help keep Timnath safe. And I think the Timnath police, if we have our own homegrown force, can also help with educational outreach and helping citizens to be aware of the issues that they need to be on the lookout for in Timnath. And I think those are ways to keep us safe.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake.
Based on all community feedback that has come in, it has been heard loud and clear that the community members want 24/7 police coverage. So I definitely think that's the direction that we should move. As far as cost of police stations, I know that's come up many times. That will be determined based on RFP, so that's not something that's been set in stone at this point. But I think that's definitely the direction in which the community should move. I also think that having officers involved in different aspects would also lend to a safer community. I know one time my child was riding a bike with a helmet on, and a police officer pulled up behind him and gave him this little ticket for, a free meal at a local restaurant. So I think having them involved in lots of different aspects helps to build that safety and the next generation of people being comfortable with the police officers as well.
Thank you. Mr. Baronin.
Thank you. I absolutely support moving the Timnath Police Department to 24-hour coverage. I don't think that the relationship we have with Larimer County is viable in the long term. They're just not going to be able to service the community in the manner that the community wants to be serviced in. And the police department is not just about law and order and speeders and Walmart. It's about community outreach. It's about building those relationships with young people and diffusing problems and situations before they get to be more serious. I've sat through several council meetings now, and I've listened to and read through the proposals that the police department's put forward, and I would be in support of building a facility here in Timnath and moving us towards 24-hour coverage.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake. A growing concern in our area is snow removal, especially along bus routes. What would you propose the town do to address the lack of plowing and road preparation?
Well, I think the town has actually taken the first steps to increase some of the snow removal. Of course, we say that now, and so far March hasn't been very snowy. But they, in the past, had already covered over 70% of school bus routes. And recently, the council did pass to increase that to over 80%. And this first year, it's kind of a pilot plan. And those community members who are on those additional streets were notified, and a survey will be done to see how well it works. Some of the concerns are blocking in cars in driveways, things like that. So just kind of working out some of those details. And I think part of it will also be looking at that budget and seeing what streets can or should be plowed on a regular basis. Maybe have different levels where if the snow is over a certain depth, then you add additional streets or something like that, and look at those options as well.
Thank you. Mr. Baronin.
So I think absolutely we should reevaluate our snowplow program. I think, but we also need to be considerate of the budget item as well. I know that some of the issues with streets in Timnath is they're not designed to be plowed, as in there's not any place to push the snow. And you also run into issues of cars parked on the street and also blocking in driveways. The routes that are plowed now were designed to be plowed. But I would love to see us have all of our bus routes plowed and have as much as financially responsible to have plowed in Timnath.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen.
I mentioned a little bit earlier that this is a relatively small budget item. We only budgeted $25,000 for last year. So there's definitely money there to do a better job. And I think one thing I'd like to bring to the council is a willingness to listen to resident feedback. I've seen a bit of defensiveness from town leadership regarding the snow removal policy. When residents complain year after year, I hear the same line of, we're doing what's in line with other communities. And I think we should be paying attention to what our residents want, and we should work the problem. And plowing the bus routes, it isn't just about the buses. Those are routes that are commonly used for everybody else as well. And we have the resources there. We can do a better job. And I think that Timnath expects us to do a better job with that.
Thank you. Mr. Baronin, besides trying to redevelop Old Town, what other areas would you develop for business besides the Harmony Corridor?
Well, in the short term, I think there aren't really a lot of options there. But in the long term, out into the future, I believe the Prospect Corridor and the Mulberry Corridor are going to become very important to Timnath as our population grows and as we start to expand towards the north. Thanks.
That's it? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Did I ask you all that question? I'm getting confused. Okay. Mr. Hansen.
There's not a lot of options. The main streets are where you put your commercial corridors. And so, you would focus on Harmony. You'd focus on Old Town first. That's where the people are. I'd want to make sure we have the right exits out of those businesses designed. And then as we expand and become larger, we would look at those other communities, and the businesses that I would want us to come here are ones that contribute to the small town character of Timnath. I think, if we're going to have fast food places, they're going to be right there next to the I-25. As we come in more, we'll have those businesses that cater more directly to Timnath residents and fit the needs of our community.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake?
As I mentioned earlier when talking about what types of infrastructure, I mentioned Prospect Road and Mulberry. So I agree that those seem like those would be the next obvious choices for where retail and businesses go. Other than I do think there may be some smaller pockets within communities that may be relevant for more of those smaller businesses. I know we heard recently at council that there's like a daycare looking to go into a residential area. So I think there's little pockets for things like that, but I think the majority of it should be on those main roads, such as Prospect and Mulberry in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen, what is your position on the increased spending allocated toward the numerous public events held by the town?
So the total expenditures of the town are in the neighborhood of around $30 million. And the total budget for town events runs in the neighborhood of about $500,000. It's a relatively small budget item. That said, I think Timnath town events should be focused on the town of Timnath residents. If we're trying to create town events that cater to all of northern Colorado, and there's not an economic incentive to do that, then yeah, that's something that we should examine. I'd also like us to see ways of being a little bit more creative with how we use our town events. For example, with the Taste of Timnath, we have a 5K. Maybe we could have more recreational type of opportunities like that help us get together and aren't increased expense on the town events, but actually bring in a little bit of money. So I support the town events. I think they contribute to the character of Timnath. I hear lots of people really love them, and they love the family-friendly atmosphere that it adds to the town.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake.
I also support town events. I have been to most of them myself, some of them on a very annual basis. My whole family will attend. I do think, though, that we should look at additional ways of funding some of those events. And within the last couple of years, the Timnath Foundation was created, with one of its purposes being to try to be able to get donations and other forms of funds to help with some of those community events. I also know that there are grant opportunities that can fund certain events, and I think we really need to look at some of those other funding opportunities, because I do believe that we should continue with the events, but perhaps just look at some more creative ways of getting money in, just as mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin?
I believe events like this are important to creating a community, a sense of a center for this community. So we're not just rooftops. We're not just people that live in Timnath and then go to our jobs. And we've got quite a few of them, and they've grown over the few years. And my kids love going to the safety fair. They bring in K-9 units, and they bring in helicopters. We always go to the Taste of Timnath, and we've been to the 4th of July event. I think it's important to create a sense of community, and I think the town government needs to play a role in that. As far as the expenses go, the ones that we attract out-of-town residents, I think that we should probably be looking for outside sources to pay for those, or figure out a way to turn them into revenue-generating events. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake, please share your position on oil and gas regulations within the town of Timnath.
I think the town of Timnath should create and enforce its own regulations. I know this has come up in the past, and with state bills that were passed last year, local communities are able to do their own regulations. And I know the county is looking at their regulations, but that's specifically for unincorporated. And while I think it's important for us to know what they're doing and be aware of that, I think we have the ability to make our own regulations. And I agree with the mayoral candidates earlier talking about monitoring air quality around the sites that are perhaps not even in Timnath, but near Timnath. I think we have a role to play in that as well. But I definitely think we need to get on board with creating our regulations and making sure those are in place.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin.
So last year, the state Senate passed State Bill 19-181, and what that does is it passes some authority back to the municipalities to create their own regulation around oil and gas. In the past, everything was managed at the state level. It also gives Timnath the opportunity to increase setbacks, to increase requirements on these companies. Earlier last year, Timnath did pass some interim regulation around this, and they set the setbacks at the exact same level that the states were. I'd like to see us increase those. 500 feet is too close for a home to be next to a well. I think that we need to take a hard look at what our current regulations are in Timnath, and I think we need to take a look at what the county's doing as well. They have a proposal that's coming up, I think, next week, and they basically doubled the setbacks that were mandated by the state prior to this.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen.
I believe public health needs to be the priority with how we approach oil and gas in the city of Timnath, or town of Timnath. And I'm also glad that the town has the ability to set its own rules and its own regulations. I'm glad we have that accountability and that responsibility here, and we don't have to just rely on what state level politicians want to do. I like the idea of monitoring. I like having data that we can look at and make sure we hold the oil and gas companies accountable in terms of making sure that they are doing things responsibly. I think as far as the standards go, I would want to examine those and see if what we want to do. Do we want to be more strict or follow the state and county level guidelines? I'm comfortable reading scientific literature. I've done it for much of my career, and I'd be interested in seeing studies, and I'd be interested in taking into account the feedback and feelings from the town. And it'd be an issue I would look forward to working with the town to make sure we're protected and keeping our children healthy.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin, would you be willing to support an air quality monitoring station?
Yes. I think it's important as oil and gas grows in popularity in northern Colorado. I think it's important that we understand what's coming into our town, whether it's being generated here in Timnath or if it's just along our borders. So yes, absolutely, I would support that.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen, you essentially answered this a moment ago, but please elaborate if you would like.
Yes, I would. Again, it's all about having information, having the data that you need to be able to make informed decisions. It's about holding everyone accountable and being able to help the community either feel at ease with the situation or know if they should take action. So yes, I would absolutely support any kind of accountability measures we can put in place.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake?
The short answer is yes. And I think I would be open to it in all different parts of town. I know sometimes when I get my electric bill part where it tells me how I am compared to my neighbors, I love when I'm more efficient than my neighbors. So if there were some kind of monitoring, even in different communities, and you saw that your neighborhood, for whatever reason, I think that would push me to figure out why the air quality is either better or worse in that, and to try to take the steps to make it better. So I definitely think that we should do that around town, and I would support that.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen, if money is tight, what budget items would you protect, and where would you look for likely budget cuts?
Well, it comes down to weighing needs and wants. Needs, we have to continue to pay for our police officers. We have to provide for public safety. That's the top priority of the residents of Timnath. That's been expressed over and over again. As far as places I would cut, there's a lot of projects in the pipeline that can be delayed. A lot of construction of parks. If we were in a serious situation, yeah, we would need to push off some of those luxury items that would certainly be nice to have. And so I'd be looking to weigh though what we need to keep the town functioning versus our progress in the luxury items.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake?
I have a very similar thought on that. I think you need to have the items that you need to run daily life in a municipality, and then there are certain items that you can put off. But I think I would also look at what items can be funded in other ways. I think a lot of times right now, most of our expenses are paid through the tax dollars and through that. And we have a very small line. I've worked in grants management for many years, and I think that that's an untapped resource right now that we haven't fully utilized. And I would really look at some of those other items that could potentially be used for more of those luxury items while still maintaining the everyday necessity parts from the budget.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin?
So I think it would be essential to analyze the budget and understand what core departments you would need, and I think things like that would be public safety and public works. And then I think you would have to next take a look at what's being called our luxury items. You know, if we have some events that maybe we could save some revenue on. Most importantly, it would probably be helpful to take a look at the 5-year capital improvement plan and see what could be pushed out into the future and what can be taken off the slate for the near term. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake, how can the town leadership more effectively use public input?
I think we could do, and I did mention earlier that one thing that I would like to do is have regular listening sessions where council members are available just to listen to community members, to hear what they have to say. I think it's also important to have our meetings available for people to view. I know there's a lot of people who would love to be here 2 Tuesday nights a month, but it's right during dinner time, or it's right during getting the kids ready for bed, or things like that. And I think having options where people can go the next day, the next week, and look at that, I think would be really important. I also think having regular open houses, we've had one recently, it was brought up earlier, but I think having those on a regular basis would be helpful, as well as some educational opportunities. The town has offered information on how the town does their budget, things like that, and then also perhaps more committees or commissions related to things that are going on.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin.
So there's all kinds of different ways that people like to be communicated with. I think what the town needs to do to increase that relationship is to increase the number of touch points. The more opportunities that folks can have, and they can be formal or informal, but I think we just need to increase them. The town needs to figure out how people want to be communicated with. Is it Facebook? Is it Nextdoor? Is it through email? And it's different for a lot of people, so we need to have an understanding of what the community wants and how we can reach them and how they can reach us. I think that we need to stream our council meetings, and actually any scheduled event I think probably should be streamed, and I think it should be archived and be available to go along in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen.
So one area I would definitely like to see improved is how the town uses the survey. In the 2018 survey, the town rated police station, rec center, and then town hall. And the comment was made at the State of the Town address that the town hall was built first for logistical reasons, and the rec center was always going to be a long-term project. And what that says to me is that question really didn't carry a lot of weight with how the town unfolded its plans. And it kind of was a waste of our time to answer that question. I think questions need to be written that really impact how the council moves forward. I would like to see the council spotlight issues that it knows will be of particular importance to residents well before it's being voted on. When you have online mobs forming over zoning changes every 3 or 4 months, I think that's a sign that breakdowns of communication have occurred. And it's occurring regularly, and so there's certainly room to work that problem and find ways to help the town feel more included with how the decisions are made.
Thank you. This is a very complicated question, which I don't envy you answering in 1 minute. What are your thoughts on metro districts? Namely, 1, how can the town make them more positive for residents? And 2, how can the town improve its use of metro districts, and could they rely on them less? Mr. Veronin.
All right, so I talked about this a little bit already. Metro districts are a tool. They help bring developments out of the ground and make them a little cheaper upfront for residents. Otherwise, you're going to be paying for the entire expense of the roads, of the utilities, of the water taps, and all of those things upfront when your house comes up out of the ground. So like I said before, I think communication is going to be the key for having successful metro districts. I think, like I said, a truth in lending statement, so you understand what your mill levy is, the duration, the endpoint of the mill, and what your metro district, what ability they have to raise your mill levy, and what the cap on that mill levy can be.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen?
Regarding existing districts, I definitely feel that the town needs to push this initiative of helping to empower residents to get on metro districts through education, helping them to understand how they operate, red flags to look for if they're being run inappropriately. Again, I think a lot of the issues of distrust and frustration with metro districts start to go away as you increase resident representation on those metro district boards. I also think the town needs to be judicious when it approves changes in metro district boundaries. I've seen situations where you have a controlling district that controls a bunch of sub-districts, but it's a plot of land where there'll be no house ever built. It's a patch of water. And it's crazy to me that a situation like that is ever approved or allowed to continue. I think if the town is going to use metro districts, it needs to take serious responsibility for making sure that residents are on board with it and that they're well informed and that they're able to have say-so in how those metro districts are run.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake.
I feel like both of the gentlemen up here made some very good points. And it actually made me think of something that I hadn't thought of before for it, which is that if this is such a hot topic with so many residents, that maybe as a town, we look at forming a smaller task force or a smaller commission or board that can help with some of those decisions, or that can help with some of that oversight. I'm sure there are a lot of residents who have an interest in what's going on with the various metro districts, and maybe forming some kind of subcommittee made up of those people can kind of direct what people are looking for, what information do they need. Is there a way to require that all new home buyers are informed of that before they sign on for their mortgage or sign for the purchase of their home? So just something new to think about there.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen, what do you think about partnering with Fort Collins for community broadband?
I think it's an interesting idea. I had a resident ask me about this a few weeks ago. Admittedly, I'm still learning a bit about it. I'm not a full expert on Fort Collins broadband services at this point. But I think if there's an economic benefit there, it's something that should be looked at. And the reason that I had this brought to my attention is there were residents that were living in the Wild Wing neighborhood of Timnath Ranch, and they lived there for a couple of years with no internet service. They had to use a hotspot for their phone to have internet service there for a while. And occasionally there are complaints with internet outages and whatnot. I would say if we were going to explore that road, I would certainly want to leave the door open for other companies to come in and make sure that we're allowing open competition to give our people the best internet service at the best price.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake?
This is a topic that I hadn't really thought about before, but I think if it's something that community members want to explore, I think we should definitely explore it. I agree that I wouldn't necessarily tie it just with Fort Collins. One, because theirs is relatively new, so we don't know long-term how that will actually all work out. But I think it's definitely something to explore. I hear people complain all the time about internet going out. There are times when cell service goes out. There's times when power is going out. So maybe even looking at a bigger, broader picture of what all of that could look like for Timnath. But I certainly don't know enough about the Fort Collins one to say, yes, we should do that or no. But I think it's something that could be explored. Thank
you. Mr. Veronin?
I absolutely think that there would be value in exploring a relationship like that. But it's not something I have a lot of data on, so I really can't comment too much on it. But I think that there are some things that we would need to consider. There are some issues here in Timnath, definitely from a cell phone standpoint and from a bandwidth standpoint on some of the services that are provided here. So I think if we were to explore that, we would probably also need to look at other options as well to make sure that it's economically viable for the town and that it's helpful for the residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake, what are your views of the Community Rec Center as it was a high priority in the last resident survey?
I feel like based on the survey that's something that we should certainly look at for within the capital improvement plan. I know that there are a lot of high ticket items that people are wanting, so I think it's important to prioritize. I also feel like even in the 2 years since that survey was completed, the population has increased and changed. So I agree with what was said earlier about having another survey to see if that's still something that community members want, and really look at whether the cost right now is able to fit within the budget and whether it's feasible at this point. But I definitely think that there are certain things that are related to a rec center that could probably be implemented without having a physical recreation center. Just looking at some youth sports options, maybe having some Timnath teams, kind of starting with some of those smaller picture items.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin?
I think first and foremost is we probably need a new community survey. The survey that keeps being referenced is 2 years old now. I know probably at a minimum we've added 1,000 new residents since then. So that's 1,000 new voices that need to be heard. My guess is they're probably still going to come back and say a rec center because it's something that you can build a community around. So I think it's important that if it's the will of the people that we explore that and that we put it into our capital plan in the near future.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen?
I really love the idea of us finding more ways to play together. Our town events, as much as I love them, I think we would have a better sense of community if we find ways to play together. And like Lisa mentioned, we don't necessarily need a facility to do that right now. We have fields, we have all kinds of options that we can use without requiring a physical facility. That said, I do think it's something residents want. I know there has been a lot of turnover, a lot of new people in the town. In 2018, I believe the town put out a data point that over 2/3 of the town had been here less than 5 years, and I suspect it's a higher percentage now. It's a town with a lot of new people, but a rec center would be a great amenity, and I think it needs to be planned out well. You look in the capital improvement plan right now, and it only has $5 million budgeted for it, and it's hard to make any kind of realistic assessments with what it's going to cost. The renovation in Windsor cost $16 million when they just did a renovation of their rec center. And that was done years ago. So I think we need some realistic assessments there.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin, do you support a marijuana business in Timnath?
The climate of marijuana is changing in the United States. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a federal crime. Years ago, the town of Timnath was given the authority to put a ban in place, and we chose to do that, and I was a part of that. I don't want it around my kids. I don't want my kids to smell it. I don't want a pot shop in town. So no, I'm not in favor of it.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen?
I support the town's current stance on that. I'm all for states' rights, local rights, and whatnot. And one of the nice things about being in a community is if you really want to live in a community with a pot shop, you're 3 minutes away. I think it's in the best interest for the town and character of Timnath to stand by that regulation that we don't have marijuana dispensaries in Timnath.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake?
No, I would not support that. Most of my professional background has actually been in public health and substance use prevention. So just looking at the data, which is really scary among our young people, is evidence enough for me to not want to support that locally.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen, do you think a request for a proposal should be made for all major town expenditures?
Absolutely. I work in a business where we have companies that we've worked with for decades, prior obviously to my time working there. But still, every single project we do with these companies, with these teams that we've built relationships with, we have to earn their business every time. And if nothing else, that keeps our prices honest and that keeps our service at a high level. I believe that we should be constantly using competition and bids for every major expense. And I think that it should be very easily accessible, public information, the types of bids we're looking for to the extent that we can share that information publicly. It's a matter of trust, it's a matter of transparency, and I would really like to make it easy for the residents of Timnath to trust that their government is spending their money efficiently and wisely.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake?
Yes, I'm very open to asking for requests for proposals. I do think it's different, though, when you're looking for a one-time project versus more long-term amenities. And so in the case of more longer term, right now the town does contract a lot of its services, and I would like to see some kind of option where that wouldn't necessarily have to go out every single year. I do think it's good every couple of years or every 3 years to kind of look at that again. But some of those routine things, I think there's a benefit to having longer than a 1-year time frame. So maybe if it was set up so that it's for 3 years or something like that. But definitely those one-time big projects absolutely should go out for requests.
Thank you. Mr. Veronin?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think the request for quote is probably one of the best ways that the town can verify and show its residents that it's getting the best product, and not only the best product, but efficiently using the town's resources. And not only should we share that process and make it transparent, but we should make available all of the quotes that come back in so that so the residents can have transparency to those things and see how the town is efficiently using their revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Who did I just hear from? Mr. Veronin, thank you very much. I wasn't listening. I'm sorry. Do we have any other questions that we would like to ask our candidates? My pile is empty over here. Have we about covered everything? Okay. All righty. Thank you very much. We will move on to having our candidates present their closing statements. They will have 1 minute each, and we will begin with Mr. Veronin.
Once again, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you to the League for moderating this evening. It's been an excellent event. I'm Brian Veronin, and I'm running for town council, and I would love to have your support. Ballots are going to be mailed soon on the 16th, and so they'll be arriving at your home soon. I think it's important that you get it filled out and turned in. We don't typically have a great turnout in April, and I'd love to see this election cycle be the best that we've ever had here in Timnath. I believe in building a complete community, and I'd like to see it grow smart and efficiently, and I'd like to be a part of that. And I think that my background and my education and experience is what this town needs to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen?
This has been an enjoyable process for me. Engineers, we're generally known for being really social and outgoing, so I thought running for office was going to be a great fit for me. But it's been enjoyable to get to know my community better. I hope to really be able to add a fresh energy and fresh perspective to the town council and the town leadership. I think having new faces is a good thing. We like that in American politics. We like to have that peer review, essentially, to use a term from my industry, of constantly making sure things are being done in the right way. And just because you have new faces doesn't mean the good things that are going are going to stop. It just means we're going to have additional people working on it. We're going to get additional energy, additional insight, and different questions. It's something that I think our town would be best served by. I come with experience that's not just a mold of having served in government. I come with different experience, and I think if you want your council to function at its best, you want that diversity of perspective and that diversity of experience. Thank you. I ask for your vote on April 7th.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake?
I'd like to thank all of the people who are here, as well as those who are watching online, and thank you for hosting and facilitating. So I said earlier that I've been on council for 2 years. Most council terms are 4 years. Because I was appointed, I was kind of in the middle of someone's term. And 2 years is not a lot of time to really get to, after learning the process, which takes a while, and I'm still learning every day, I feel like 2 years just wasn't quite enough to really dig my heels into some of the things that I wanted to accomplish. And so just as a reminder, the things I'd like to do would be to create that sense of community, ensure the responsible growth and development of Timnath, and increase the civic engagement. And I would love to have that opportunity to try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And this concludes our forum for town council. And I would remind you that candidates might be in the lobby for a little while for you to address them directly. And please join me in showing our gratitude to all the candidates for their willingness to serve.